with tonight and for the next 4 weeks. So today, I think what I'm going to do is we'll have like a little bit of just an introduction to the method, and I'll do some demonstrations as to how to get started. And tonight, we're going to start out some like rough sketches with the clay. So does everybody have clay? You nod. Okay, awesome. So we're going to see how this goes with us all sort of working together. So I'll do a demonstration and then let you know when it's time for us to kind of pull it out, and you can work with me. And that way, if any questions come up as you're working, you can shout those out, and I can try and give a help. So, and actually, since I don't know, I think some of you are familiar faces to me from around Baltimore Clayworks, but some of you aren't. So if you don't know me, my name is Shawna Pincus, and I'm a potter. I live here in Baltimore, and I've been teaching with the Clayworks for, I don't know, a while. I don't remember how many years at this point, to be honest, but it's been a while. Matt says 10. Okay, probably about that, yeah. I've also taught, what was that?
12 maybe?
12, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. But I've also taught public school and art classes in public school, elementary, middle and high school at some certain points. And I used to teach art education for Towson University. So, and I did that for about, probably also for about 12 years. So now I'm just in my studio as a studio potter and teaching for the Clayworks. So that's a little bit about me. All right, so I've been playing around with the Kurinuki method, and I made a couple of examples. These are just bisqued and haven't been glazed yet, but just to kind of give you an idea. And I was trying to think of how I'd be able to share some other images with you guys. I have a Pinterest board started that has a ton of different types of Kurinuki cups on it. So if I can figure out a way to share that with you so that you would have a resource to go and look for it, I'll have to see if I can do that. But I'm feeling like that might be the easiest way for you to see, because there's some really beautiful ones out there. The nice thing about the Kurinuki is that you can really sort of customize it to your own aesthetic. So if you are somebody who really likes this sort of chunky, more rustic look, you can certainly go for that, and you can really push it with these pieces. But if you're someone who would rather something a little bit smoother, then you can certainly go that route as well. So I have like a few different pieces up here. This is going to be, you're going to work on these over a few days because you need to let them dry out a little bit. So for tonight, I'm going to suggest that we all do a few different versions, and that'll give you some different pieces to play around with and sort of experiment with. So to start out, week 1, we're just going to start roughing out, getting some ideas out there. The second week, we'll talk about how to refine them and finish them up. The third week, we're going to talk about how to take what we've learned and kind of push it a little bit. So maybe introducing some new textures and tools. And then the fourth week, we'll talk a little bit more about how to finish these with glazes and that sort of a thing. And of course, it may shift depending on how we go. But all right, so I'm gonna start doing a little demonstration here, and sure that I've got this right. All right, so I'm going to stand up so you're going to get the torso view. All right, so I'm using just my B-Mix 5. I think Matt said that most of you have the 768, which is a stoneware. This is also a stoneware. It's just a white stoneware, and it's just the one that I use in my studio. Because I was playing around with a darker clay body, but I got kind of tired of having to clean up in between with my white clay. So I decided to switch. I'm just going to do it with the white clay from now on, so I don't have to switch back and forth as much. So for Kurinuki, you're pretty much just going to start out with a block of clay, and we're going to shape it to be roughly the shape of a cup or the vessel that you're working towards. So I'm just going to go for something that's like a little cup, and I think it's kind of the easiest way to go. So sorry if this shakes the computer a bit. So I don't need quite this much clay. You can start with either just a block if you want to really just kind of go for it, is just to completely cut off a block, or if you would rather, you can wedge it and kind of shape it into the piece. I tend to always cut really small blocks of clay off of my big block, so I always end up wedging it. I just never end up eyeballing it into the right place. But so I'm just gonna give it a quick shape, and I'm gonna kind of just slam it down on my table into, again, like roughly the shape that I want. So I'm looking at a cup that's, this one's kind of small, but these are roughly the same idea. So it's pretty much just a cylinder to start out with, and then I'm going to go in and shape the foot. So I'm working on just a board. This is a, what kind of board it's called? The kind that you put up in the shower, like behind showers. It's slightly absorbent, but any board will work, or any surface. You could do it on your kitchen table, doesn't really matter. All right, so I have just kind of a rough block of clay. If you have a turntable, that can be really useful in this. If not, then anything that you can put this on to just move it around is also helpful. So if you don't have a turntable or a piece of wood, probably just like a paper plate or something would work just fine, because it's just so that you can easily shift your block of clay as you're working on it. All right, so when I'm about to get started, I'm just going to take a look at the profile of this. I'm gonna squish it down a little too much. I'm gonna look at the profile of this and just start to think about where my cup is going to evolve. This first night is just going to be about getting your basic rough sketch out, and I'll show you what we do next afterwards. But let's see. So I'm just going to look at this. I think for this one, I'm going to leave the outside alone. I'm just going to work on carving out the inside, and then maybe the next one I'll play a little bit with the outside edge. So I think for this first one, I'm just going to leave the outside the way that it is for now. And I'm going to take a loop tool. So any loop tool you have will work. The tools that I found that I'm using the most with this is this this kind of larger loop tool, a smaller one for refining when I get to that point. Fettling knife is helpful. If you have one of these kind of cheese cutter things, these can be helpful as well. And then other than that, I think it's just a matter of preference if you want to add some textures and stuff. So while I'm looking at this, I'm just going to start to hollow out the inside. So I'm thinking about the interior space, and I'm going to work slowly. This is kind of a meditative thing, and I'm starting at about that point. You're going to ultimately want your walls to be about a ½ an inch thick for this stage. So this is where the turntable comes in, because I'm just going to start to hollow this out. So I'm just going to get this started. I'm finding this to be like really meditative during this time, because you have to just sort of remove a little bit at a time. And it's kind of nice to just slow down and focus on the clay. So I'm not being super neat. I'm just starting to hollow this out. This clay right now is pretty soft, and I'm gonna go all the way down till about, well, if I'm gonna put a foot on this, I'm gonna leave myself a good amount of space. It's just like with throwing on the wheel, you wanna give yourself enough room to play. You don't wanna go through the bottom. So I'm gonna check it periodically, the same that I would for any hand building piece. And I'm just gonna try and get as much of the little chunks away as I can. You want this to be fairly even. It'll make your job easier when you go into carving it the next day. The reason that you're going to wait is because you want the walls to be a little bit stiffer. Right now, this is just the like kind of a mock-up where you're just getting it started. And then once the walls stiffen a bit, it becomes much easier to carve. All right. So I'm not going to worry about the rim right now. I'm going to leave that nice and thick. And I have probably, I can feel on the inside, I can feel till about here where the foot is. So I'm going to turn this upside down now and start to carve out the foot area. Okay. So I'm going to just use the same tool. When I'm working on the wheel, I always prefer to start with the profile of a cup. I find if I start in the middle and you remove too much going this way, going out, then you don't really have as much control over the width of your foot ring. So what I'm going to do is just start from the outside, and I'm going to hold my loop tool at a bit of an angle, and this is a little bit like trimming. And I'm just going to start to remove this edge of clay. And again, this is just a rough version, so I will clean it up later. But for now, I'm just starting to take out that edge. I think the neat thing about these is once they're finished and fired, they have this sort of rock feel. Like they have that kind of weight to them, but not actually. They don't actually have the weight. It's like the implied weight. So once I have that just sort of roughed out, then I'm going to go and take a little bit out from the interior, just right in here. This is kind of like with your trim tools, where I find that the different shapes help for different jobs. And this one has been my go-to for just sort of removing big chunks of clay, whereas this one's nice to get sort of an angled approach. If you're not sure how thick your base is, and again, we're leaving it thick, you can just take a needle tool and just give it a measure. So I'm just supporting it and putting my finger on the inside and just putting that needle tool in all the way till I hit my finger. And then when I pull it out, I can see that it's about this thick. So let's see. So this is probably about a good starting point. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to cut it in half so you can see the profile, and then that should give me something to work on where you can actually see the inside for the next round of things. So I'm just going to all right, so you can kind of get an idea of what that profile looks like. All right, because I know it's hard to see the inside from here. Okay. So once I have this, if it was still put together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it, I'm going to just put it upside down so the inside and the rim don't dry out as quickly. And I'm just going to leave it out on a board for, I have found that in my studio, coming back to it the next day, so if I, you know, probably a solid 24 hours, depending on what time of day it is, and coming back to it, and if that's about the right stage. I would suggest checking it before that, because depending on your air conditioning or your climate or whatever in your house, wherever it is, it may dry out a little bit quicker or a little bit slower. What you're aiming for is a soft leather hard. So about where you would want it to trim if you were on the wheel. How many of you are wheel throwers? Hand builders? All right, yeah, a little bit of both. That's me too. I like to do both. I like to combine them most days. So either way, so these are gonna have to dry slowly anyway. So what I usually do is I leave them out upside down so that they don't, the rim doesn't dry out too quickly. As soon as it hits that firm or the soft leather hard, then you can go ahead and cover it up and just try and keep it to that point until the next class. So I'm going to do a couple more of these. This is the basic idea. I'm going to do a few more of these so that you can, that have some different techniques to them, maybe some just playing around with the outside a little bit more and shaping it before we move on. So let's see. All right, so if you would like to, you are welcome to just keep watching, or if you wanted to get a little bit of clay and get your hands dirty, that's totally fine too. I will keep talking and keep working. So, oh, okay, so wait, I have questions. I'm now seeing. Yep. Yes, cover with a plastic bag. So what I do is I find that it like a grocery store bag, if you collect those are great. If you have dry cleaning bags, those are the best. If all else fails, you can always take a garbage bag and just cut that up and wrap it around. Just make sure that there's no holes in your bag. And whenever you're putting a bag around, let's see, you want to make sure that you're laying the bag over top and really tucking it underneath so that no air gets in. Okay, and still check it periodically just to make sure that it's the right consistency. I tend to keep a spray bottle around, and if it's going to be a few days, I'll just go in and give it a little spritz and then cover it back up with the plastic, and it should be just fine. Wedging can be, yeah, and okay, Matt already answered that one, I think. Okay.
Yeah, I think Barry had asked the question about wedging. Where can it be done if you don't have a wedging board?
Yeah, pretty much any surface that's a hard surface. Let's see. think the, trying to think. So I used to have just like boards that I would carry around whenever I did workshops. And I mean, really just a wooden board works totally fine. If you have some clamps that you can clamp it down onto a table, that's even better because it won't move around so much. I find that's the most challenging thing about wedging when you don't have a wedging table, is finding something that's not just going to slide all over the place as you're trying to wedge. Okay. So I'm going to just put my scraps back on in here. So I think with this next one, I'm going to play around with the exterior a little bit before getting into carving the interior. So it's kind of can be fun to play around with the different shapes that you're starting out with too. So like what happens if instead of starting with something that's kind of cylindrical like this, if you started with a complete round ball, how would that change the piece? Looks like I have some people getting clay. Because these are carved from a solid chunk of clay, you're going to want to let them dry slowly. So having that plastic bag, or even if you have a Tupperware, that can be pretty useful too, like a Tupperware container with a lid. That's pretty useful for keeping pieces at the right consistency. Make this one a little taller. I'd say the other interesting thing that you can play around with is you can, a lot of times when we're working on the wheel or with hand building, we try to make the rim very even. This would be an interesting opportunity to play around with changing the width and the height of your rim and see if you can maybe get some movement happening up in there. Sometimes if you're able to kind of slam on the table in one direction, gets one side of your clay lump up a little bit higher than the rest, which can make for kind of an interesting profile if you're looking over the piece. Okay, so this one's a bit taller and it has a little bit of a different kind of rim because I was playing around with that a little bit. So when I'm making this one, I'm going to think about that rim as I go. Something I like about this technique, whenever I teach wheel classes, people always say, I'm going to just let the clay speak to me and become what it wants to be. And I think that when you're on the wheel, that can be very difficult to do because you really need to be in control of the clay to get it to do what you want it to do. But with this technique, I think you can really let the clay kind of speak to you a little bit more. So as you're working on your pieces, have that little conversation with the clay and just stop and think about it, take a look, step back from it and see what the shape is telling you it wants to be. All right, so I'm going to try playing around with this a little bit. I'm going to go for a faceted approach on the outside. So before I start carving the interior, I'm going to start playing with the exterior a bit. So I'm not going to take a whole lot of clay off the edge, but I'm just going to start to kind of slice through and remove some of this. If I don't go all the way to the bottom, I end up getting these kind of shelved spaces. So this really kind of speaks to the technique. Looks kind of rock-like. How's everybody doing out there? Doing good? Has anybody had the chance to work with clay in a while, or is this your first time getting back to it? Tell me, first time?
First time.
First time. Does it feel good? My favorite thing is to open a bag of clay and just the smell of it. It just always makes me so happy. So when Matt, I don't know what I'd do if I had to go that long without it. All right, so I've started to facet the edges here, and I think you can kind of see. Hold it up a little bit more. Just kind of roughing out, giving a little bit of texture to the outside. And then I'm going to go ahead and start on the inside. Now, the texturing can also be done later on. So we can also play with that. I think there's a lot of different options. And like I said, I think you need to just sort of play around and see what speaks to you and what works. So I'm just going to start digging out this clay. You can, of course, make any forms with this. There's some really beautiful, I've seen really beautiful boxes and trays made with this method. I thought for the sake of this class, it would be easy enough to just kind of stick with the concept of cups, but I would love it if you want to apply this to some other forms. I think that would be a great experiment. So again, I'm trying to stay to about 1/2 inch in my walls. Attention to where I'm going. If I want this to just be flat at the bottom, I can just go all the way down and leave just about 1/2 inch of space. But if I want to put a foot on there, I'm going to keep some more room. Don't be too concerned if you end up going through. I've done that plenty of times trying to play around with this, especially in the next part. Once these have dried a little bit, I think it's easy to get carried away and just sort of carve right on through. Just remember to take like one layer at a time. So you don't want to carve too much into it. Just take a little bit because you can't really put it back. It's like cooking, you know, you don't want to over season or over salt because you can't take it away. You can always add more. Stop and show you about how far down I've gotten, which is about to there, I'd say. So I'm gonna put a foot on this. So I'm gonna stop, not go down so much. Flip this over. I might use this guy to start, see if I don't go through. How's everybody coming along on their first one?
Well, I'm doing something. A cup, I'm doing something.
I will say these tend to not look like too much until until the next day. Like this is the roughing out stage is really it doesn't look like too much right now.
It's fun.
It is fun, isn't it? Okay.
Can I ask a silly question? Is that like an actual like kitchen implement cheese cutter thing, or is that like a pottery tool that just like looks like a cheese cutter, so we call it one?
This is an actual pottery tool, but I've always called it a cheese cutter. Maybe Matt knows if it has a more technical name.
I thought it was a cheese cutter.
I'm pretty sure that mine is an actual cheese cutter and it looks just like yours.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Oftentimes the cheese cutter has that rolling wheel, and you can actually remove it, so that gives you more functional space. But yeah, that's another good fastening tool.
Yeah, this is the cheese cutter that I grabbed out of my kitchen. It's like I know is an actual cheese cutter, yeah. And I've tried using that, so that can also give you some facets, or like a vegetable peeler also works. But this, yeah, I'm pretty sure I got this from the clay supply. I think.
So I have a question about traditional Kurinuki.
Yep.
I find I am doing a lot of smoothing of the interior.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the idea in traditional Kurinuki is nothing like that. You're just carving. You're not monkeying with it afterwards. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of research and trying to find that because I was curious about that same question. And from what I can gather, it seems like the technique itself is just is defined as simply carving a vessel out of a solid block of clay. And it doesn't really go into too much of those specifics. I've seen what I feel like is a lot of different variations of it. So I don't know if there's there's exact, like a technically one way to do it. Not that I can find.
Okay.
But I have seen, I mean, I've seen where people, some people really celebrate the idea of carving, and they try to put a lot of these, you know, kind of facets and making it look like rocks. And I think there's one artist that I was looking at who actually like takes pieces of rocks and pushes it into the clay to get that texture on the exterior. But so I think you can kind of go either way. When I was making them, I was primarily using tool. I didn't introduce a lot of water. Really just maybe like a damp sponge around the rim, because I wanted that to be smooth for a drinking surface. But this tool, I found, as you're carving it out, tends to make it fairly smooth. But
how important is it, like either when you glaze or just work with it generally, that the walls be like uniform in width? Like if it's thinner in one area, is there like what's the thinnest it should be? And then is that going to cause problems if like it's just asymmetrical in how wide the wall is in different areas?
You mean in this particular method, or just, so I think in all ceramics, you really want the wall to be fairly even. And what happens is that as clay dries, it shrinks, and it contains different amounts of moisture. So the idea is that you want it to all dry and shrink and be uniform. Otherwise, you end up getting cracking, and that's generally why people say that it needs to be the even thickness. I mean, it's also kind of a nice feel to it. If you're gonna push it, as you know, part of an art decision or an aesthetic decision, with making some parts really like thicker than others, then I would say try drying it as slow as you possibly can, and making sure that it is completely dry before it goes into the kiln.
On that note, do you have to worry about compressing it?
So this one, you don't. With this technique, there's not a lot of compression that happens because you are carving from the solid block. But again, that's why we let it dry really slowly. So these pieces, and I think it's tempting to want to just let them dry out, because it feels like it would just be fine because it's kind of chunky looking like that. But you want to let them dry nice and slow so that you don't get any of that kind of issue.
And sorry, this is like a stupid question, but before, when you poked the needle tool or whatever through it to see like what the thickness was, do you have to do anything in particular to like close that up, or how do you like handle that if you do that?
No, I mean, you can, if it bothers you, you can kind of just push it back together, but I've never had an issue with the needle tool. I mean, usually as you work on it, it kind of closes itself back up. So, especially with these, because you're going to still be carving and messing with the surface.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's fun to see you guys working at your kitchen tables and stuff. All right, let me see. All right, so on that note, I think what I'll do is a really smooth one, because this one I was kind of playing with it being.
I just have a quick question regarding the foot. I know we're going to be messing around more with the inside, but for the foot as well?
Yes.
As far as depth and all that for the foot.
Yep.
And could you show the cross-section piece again?
Sure.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see. So let's see. I don't know if this helps at all, but I have some that I was playing around with the other day that I have covered, and this is at the right stage for continuing to carve. So you can kind of feel, or you can't feel, but you can kind of see how it's not squishy anymore. It can kind of hold its shape a little bit, but you know, it's still quite thick. So when I start to carve into this, I'm going to be able to refine it. So it's going to be a little bit more like when you're trimming. Let's see. I'm going to do this one. So I'm going to do this one as a rounded one. I'm going to start with a circle and see how that ends up going. See how it changes the shape. So, and I can smooth this
with real thick walls right now. That's what we're supposed to do, and then carve out the foot still with really thick walls.
Yep. So everything should have really thick walls. So if you see this one, you can see the cross section again. Has thick walls all the way around. So it's a similar profile to what you would see if you were to cut open a cup, but it's just really thick. So as I go in and carve away, I'm going to be opening up this space some more. I don't know if anybody has one of these kind of wiggle wires, but these are kind of fun to make some textures on there, on your outsides as well.
Yeah, Shawna, I think as an aside, I don't remember if it was Natalie that I was talking with by email. Somebody was asking a question about wiggle wires, and I suggested you can undo a ballpoint pen spring. You can also undo a spiral notebook and pull that wire wide for different lengths and different dimension.
I think I even got a spring. I think I picked up at the hardware store one time, or the dollar store one time, I don't know. But that's like a really big wiggle wire. Yeah, it would. The technique would be good for the firmer clay you have around. That's actually what these were. I had a bag of clay that was a little bit too firm for me to do anything else with. All right, so I'm gonna go for kind of a smoother approach on this one, and I have 2 half circles here I'm gonna play with. A little bit of stability there. So has anybody been working in their kitchens over the last couple months? Making anything good? You guys can always unmute if you wanna.
I've been eating a lot. Does that count?
Are you eating anything good?
The kids and I have been making a mountain of dumplings.
Oh.
Chinese dumplings. Trying lots of different fillings.
Nice.
We've killed at least 4 different sourdough starters.
Ah, that's what I was gonna say. That's what I've been doing, sourdough.
Yeah, me too. Meaning I started I guess a bread or whatever. So I have to go stretch and fold right now. I'll be back in a minute.
I've been doing sourdough too. It's funny.
It's so fun.
It's in the air.
Yeah. So I just tried making one and it's like, I think the clay is too wet.
The clay is too wet. Can I see what?
I was trying to, I smushed it. It was really looked like a 1-year-old did it.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, they do kind of look like that at this stage. They're not super.
Right, but it's like very like mushy, so I can't even, like when I carve, it's just
Too soft.
yeah. So that's okay. As long as you send us the recording and we can watch again.
All right. If you do have soft clay, because I know my clay is really soft too, and just as I'm going around the outside here, I'm just making sure to support it with the hand that's not carving, just to keep it from totally smushing. But yeah, try and go for about a ½ inch so it doesn't get too squishy.
Can you show the bottom of your sample when again? I'm not too good with feet.
This one?
Yeah, can I see that at the bottom? Yeah, just so you, okay. Yeah, boy, that looks a lot better.
So, so I think when you're doing a foot, all you need to, so when you turn it over, I'll see if I have enough on here. When you turn it over, you want to just take, part of your loop tool that's kind of on the flatter side, I would say, as opposed to like this one, which is very rounded, and just start to draw a circle in your clay. where you want, how wide you want your foot to be. And just take away a little bit at a time. And remember that you're going to be carving more away. So it doesn't have to be, it should be chunky. It should look like the first wheel class you ever took. And then I'm just going to do pretty much the same thing, but just a little bit inside. So I'm making like a second circle, like a little target. And then I'm just going to scrape away just a little bit at a time inside that circle. And don't go too far. And if you want, if it's too difficult to do it at this stage, just don't. You can just leave it, and then when the clay has firmed up a little bit more, you can go back and do it then. So by doing it now, you're just trying to give yourself a little bit of a head start, so you have a little bit less carving when it's firmer. But if you can't, if you don't want to, you can certainly leave it until later on.
Definitely has a certain Flintstones quality.
So has anybody seen Kurinuki cups before? No?
No.
Yes.
I'm gonna see if this will work. I don't promise it will. Let's see if I can show you some images.
Shawna?
Yeah.
You can also, if you wanted to hold and prepare, you could do share screen at a later, in another class.
Okay.
If you wanted to put together a PowerPoint,
Oh,
you
okay.
see that share screen option, and then you can present anything that's on your desktop or the laptop.
Oh, all right. I will
So-
definitely do that next time.
Yeah, because you had mentioned Pinterest, so that's, you know, if you pull up
Yeah.
your Pinterest page on the laptop, you could just do share screen.
Yeah. Okay. I will do that. I'm just gonna see if I can't find a few examples to show you. real quick.
You can also make your Pinterest board public, and we could just find it. If you tell us where to find it.
Sure, you could send out a link after class. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this would, can you, I don't know how well this will work, but if you can kind of get an idea of what a finished one. So this one is one that's like very angular. You know, they really went into the outside carving and kind of celebrating that stone-like quality. This would be kind of the other direction where it's more, trying to make sure it's not too under my lights. It's a little bit smoother. You can still see the kind of carving, but done with definitely like a more of a white clay and a different approach. This is not a cup, but if you see, this would be this is a vase form where it's been hollowed out to hold some stems. But again, really celebrating just this sort of stone-like quality.
Who did those vases?
Olivia Fiddes, Fiddes, it says. I will say that my only thing with Pinterest is I don't guarantee that these are the correct people, sometimes it's hard to
Yeah.
know who the artist is. And sometimes the links just don't go anywhere. But I kind of do it for the images to have some different options. So this was one that I don't know if you can see it. It's looking funny in my screen, but if I can put it into a PowerPoint, that would be helpful. But this one, you can really see where they would use like a wiggle wire or something with texture to carve away at the outside. So, you know, just know that it is going to be more of an organic feel, or it can. I mean, it doesn't have to be. I guess if you really worked it, you could certainly go the other direction. But, you know, traditionally, these have a little bit more of an organic feel to them than like a wheel thrown piece. So this is another way to handle the foot, where it's more of a carved out.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I probably pinned the same image multiple times because I come back to this, you know, when I have a few minutes and, you know, go ahead and pin it and then see it again. This one really plays with the idea of like a lip being undulating a little bit, you know, where it's not perfectly in the round there. So kind of celebrating some of the tears that happen and some of the movement and motion that you get. So I will put together, I'll put together a PowerPoint. That would be a good, because then I can show you some more examples. Because I think, you know, it's good to know where you're going. This is the first time I've ever had to teach on the computer like this, so it's definitely a learning experience. All right. How's everybody coming along with them?
So next week or after we let these firm up, are we going to make the walls thinner?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is like, this is just sort of like the rough out stage. And then once they have firmed up a bit, then we're going to keep on carving into them. And that's when we'll thin the walls and kind of make some, you know, some choices about the surface and that sort of a thing.
As a resource for folks who are not familiar with like hand building techniques, or is there like anyone on YouTube or some other like tutorials to kind of learn a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. Are you looking for specifically the Kurinuki, or are you looking for just generic hand building?
I guess anything that you think like I've taken one like wheel class, and I just wonder like what skills you're using right now that I'm like not sure how to name. Like if you think that there's like kind of basics that are going into like approaching this method.
Yeah. So let me think. So I know that as far as like with the Kurinuki, I know Melissa Weiss has been putting out some videos. So she's a good resource for that. I want to say that Sunshine Cobb has been putting out some hand building videos. She's been pretty active with that. I'm more of a hand builder, so I'm not sure if I've seen a wheel throwing one in a while. I don't know if Matt knows of anybody who's been doing that online. But honestly, I mean, YouTube you can pretty much search for whatever and you'll come up with a million different videos. Yeah, they do have good books out. Yeah. If I think of anybody, I will pass that along.
Thank you.
Sure. Was there anything specific that you were wondering about? Because I can certainly try and answer those questions for you.
I don't know. I think it's sort of like a you don't know what you don't know, like what inherently like you're doing that is like part of hand building technique, you know. I'll check out those two artists and see what I find.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that like this particular technique, I think kind of speaks to both hand building and throwing. And it's kind of a newer technique for a lot of people that maybe haven't played around with it before. But I think the basic concepts are going to be the same throughout, where you're really working on, you know, even walls from a technical aspect, and then thinking about what your purpose of your piece is going to be. You know, are you making a cup? Are you making a bowl? Is there going to be a handle to it? Is it something that's meant for, you know, a tea bowl that maybe doesn't have a handle? How is it going to feel when you put it to your mouth? And oh, I'm going to go on cups because that's kind of what we've been focused on. But you know, so I think just a lot of the same concepts apply. How is it going to sit on the table when you're thinking about the foot? And you don't have to have a foot on these if you want it to just, you know, go right into the table. The other option is if you wanted to just kind of bevel that edge a little bit, then you wouldn't have to put a foot on there. Yeah, so let me see. Maybe I'll do another one that's more angular to
Inside of that round one before you put it away?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so for something like this, I'm just gonna hollow out the inside, and then I'll show you the other option if you don't want to put a foot in, or if you just want to hint at a foot. So as you're working on these, you know, I think I'd said it before, but you're going to want to have, you know, a few of these going so that you can have a chance to play with them and see some different textures or surfaces you can come up with, some different shapes. If you're just starting and you're not comfortable with doing different shapes, then just go ahead and do a few basic cylinders, which would just be like what I'm doing right now. And you'll be, you know, I think it's amazing what you can do with just one simple form. You know, if you think about the surface and the way you're presenting it, you can really kind of mess with it. Just a simple cylinder. So let's see, this one, just a little cup. I think I've got about the right amount of clay at the base. So for this one, I'm not gonna put a whole foot on the bottom. Not gonna worry about carving. All I'm gonna do is just, as I turn it over, I can just give it a little bit of a bevel. And all I'm doing is cutting off that edge, just so that it has a little bit of lift off the ground. You don't even have to go that far if you're not comfortable with that. If you wanted a smoother surface, you can certainly take a rib to this. And we'll play, if you have a metal rib that you want to use for next week, that would can be a good tool to use too. So I'm just going to smooth the surface here. If you feel like your clay is mushy, just support it from the inside. Has anybody finished their first one yet? Anybody finished their first one? No.
Yeah, I've got my first one done.
Oh, nice. Yeah, those look great.
So it's very thin in a few places.
Okay.
Well, very thin. It's relatively thin.
Well, it's going to be thinned out even more, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. When we thin it out next time, we're going to try and be conscious of not going through it.
Okay. Yeah, it's not that thin, but.
How's it going down there?
This thing is real thick, and I don't even know what's happening at the bottom, but.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's okay. It looks really good. Just, yeah, keep going with it. Just, I mean, not if that's the right thickness, you can put that to the side, but don't lose faith in it because they do change a lot after we start carving them. And even if you have one that you're not crazy about, it's nice to have something that you can kind of play around with and practice on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks.
I think my clay is too soft. It just, everything. I had a hard time controlling it.
So if your clay feels like it's soft, just don't do as much. So leave it a little bit, you can leave it a little bit thicker and don't worry about the foot.
Oh, okay, just ignore the foot.
Just ignore the foot. You can get back into the foot next time when you're carving more. So if you feel like it's too soft and it's giving you trouble, just don't even worry about it. We can come back to it next time. So just do something like this where it's just a cylinder that's been hollowed out and it's just flat on the bottom.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So this is just, you're just getting a head start. It's not, this isn't going to be what it looks like in the final pieces. Okay.
When you take out the inside, I think I'm having the same problem that she is with the soft clay.
Mhm.
I'm giving it a shot anyway. Do you like just go around, or do you scoop it out, or it doesn't matter? Just
So I scoop it out. I use this tool and
like,
so I'm trying to show you from a different angle. All right, so if we pretend this is my thing I'm working on, I take this part of the loop. All right, we're gonna see if I can do this looking in the in the video. All right, and I'm just gonna go around.
just keep going around and around.
Yeah, and I pretty much what'll happen is you'll take out, it's kind of like peeling an orange or an apple peel, where you'll get out this top part here,
Right.
and then you can kind of go back in and scoop out that little bit. And then just do the same thing, take out a little bit more.
I think my loop's too small.
If you have a smaller loop tool, it's just going to take a little longer. Does everybody have the kind of loop tool that is like a round wire as opposed to a trim tool? You know what I mean by that? So like this.
No, I think mine is flat. I think it's a trim tool.
Yeah.
So a trim tool, that might give you a little bit of resistance. I find that for removing soft clay, the tools that have that rounded wire, or if you even have just like an old coat hanger or something around, you can use something on. You know, it's just wire, then like, you know, tape it to a pencil or something. And the rounded part helps to scoop the clay out more, whereas with a let's see if I have one. So with this sort of a trim tool where it's more of the sharper edge, that tends to work a little bit differently. It still works. It's just you might be getting a little bit more clay than you bargained for when you're scooping. So I definitely find that this kind that's flat will like cut it a little bit more, whereas the wire one scoops it. I don't know if that makes sense. But this seems to still be working okay. Yeah, all right. So this, I haven't tried this one yet. So this one, I think it works fine. Just, yeah, that looks good. Just be careful because it's a little bit sharper of a tool. So you just have to be a little bit more aware and maybe just take your time a little bit more. See where I'm headed there. what this is doing is it's giving you a head start for the next time, because once your clay firms up, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to carve, just because it's like trimming, you're going to be carving away at a stiffer clay. So we're trying to just give ourselves a little bit of a head start here, as far as the carving out. And I think you probably could just leave it out and carve your clay as it's set up and stiffer. But I tend to prefer this because then the clay that I scoop out is soft and I can just throw it back in my bag, and I don't have to worry about reclaiming it as much. So once you're at the next stage, the clay is going to be a little bit stiffer as it is carved away. So you're going to have to kind of rehydrate it a bit before you reuse it again. So this is just sort of a way to get a head start on this so that you don't have as much reclaim to do. Realize something I do in my in-person classes that I didn't really do here was ask what your experience is. Usually I can better gauge what I'm teaching if I know where everybody is. So if you have a chance and you can unmute and just let me know what what classes you've taken, and if you're primarily a hand builder or a wheel thrower, maybe how long you've been doing it. Or I've definitely had people who've come back to it after several years of not working in clay. But yeah.
I'm a complete beginner. I started playing with clay about 2 months ago when I went on a leave from work. I don't think I ever want to wheel throw because I have nerve damage in my hands.
Okay.
And I really love hand building.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's where I am. Reading and watching everything I can see, and this is the first class I've taken.
Oh, cool. Well, welcome.
Thank you. So I've got a big, fairly coarse cup cut.
Yep.
That's okay.
That's what you want.
And then I have an experiment, which is hollowed out round.
Yep. Okay.
And then I'm working on a taller, skinnier one right now.
Perfect.
I suppose my one question is the only thing, and I have a lot of it, is all I have is earthenware. Does it matter what clay body you're working with?
So it doesn't, for the forming technique, it does not matter what clay body you're working with. The only time that that's going to come into play is when you're firing it. So
okay.
Are you in Baltimore? Are you local?
I am way, way, way northern Baltimore County, right below the Pennsylvania line.
Oh, okay. Are you using Baltimore Clayworks to fire your pieces, or do you have something else lined up?
I don't know what I'm going to be doing at this point. I'm just making lots of things, so I have to figure that out.
Okay. So then I suggest just keeping track of which pieces you're using, if you have earthenware, if you end up getting something else. So wherever you end up taking it to be fired, just make sure you let them know, because it,
oh, sure.
Yeah, that it's an earthenware, because generally that's a lower temperature clay body. So
all right.
You don't want them to put it in a kiln that would melt it.
Melt everything. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
So I started in the winter and I took one wheel building class, but that's my only experience with clay. So I thought this was fun. Alternative.
Where did you take the class?
I took it at Baltimore Clayworks.
Oh, okay. Nice.
So yeah, I live east of downtown, near the.
Got it.
So yeah.
Awesome.
I am kind of a beginner, but I've been a beginner for like 10 years. So I've taken a whole lot of different classes, at different places, and I just really I love hand building, but I've also taken a bunch of wheel classes.
I find there's definitely a draw to both. I started out as a wheel thrower, and I did that for the first time I saw somebody throw on the wheel, I was like, I have to learn how to do that. That looks amazing. And the first class I ever took was when I was in high school, and I took a class at the Tyler School of Art, which I think it's not that anymore. It's definitely not there anymore. But we used raku clay, which if you've ever used raku clay, it's like super chunky. And that was my first wheel throwing experience. And it was, I don't think I had any skin left on my hands by the end of that class. But it was raku, so that was really super fun because you got to see all the fire and the flames, and it was a really neat process. But so then when I got to college, I started taking wheel again, and I had to learn everything about it. But yeah, but in my work now, I primarily hand build, and I add some wheel thrown elements to it. But I think they're
my favorite is actually pinch pots.
Yeah.
I keep wanting to pinch this, but that would be cheating.
Pinch pots are one of the only, like the pinching technique. I love the way it looks, but I don't have the patience for it. There's so many pinched pieces that I think are just so beautiful, but I don't know. I can't physically do it. It gets on my nerves.
Speaking of pinch pots, years ago, Clayworks did, this is in the 90s, so that's how old this is, when there wasn't the gallery, the studio was all in one down basement. They had a pinch pot summer course. It was like a week long with this artist in resident. And we pinched gigantic things. It would not fit in my car when I took it home. And I still have it. It's huge.
Wow.
But it was just thousands of little pinches for a whole week.
Wow.
How were your wrists after that? I always worry about people who pinch getting.
Oh, well, because they were so big, you actually had to build them up very slowly because the weight would collapse them. It wasn't like you were turning out thousands of little handheld bowls.
Yeah.
So these were huge. Like the one that I have upstairs it's probably 36 inches in diameter and about 3 feet tall.
Wow. That's awesome. I've always been, because Sam does a bit of the big pinching, right? I've always wanted to learn that technique. It's just amazing.
I love this one. I definitely didn't make this, but this is all pinched.
Oh, that's beautiful.
A woman named Megan Burke did that.
There's something so tactile about those pinch marks that I just love them.
Yeah, I love it.
I remember there was a woman who did an installation at the Clayworks many years ago, and I want to say that she pinched. I think it was that she pinched, or no, maybe it was coils. I think it was coils. Now I'm thinking about it. It was like 1 million coils that made up this big installation.
Those, is it bean finnerin?
Yeah, maybe.
They look like koosh balls.
I think so.
Those were individual coil sticks.
Yes, that were all
assembled.
together.
Yeah, all assembled into a big sculpture.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, I think you might be talking about Maman Ricken. That sounds like Maman's technique for pinching.
Which I remember she came from New York, and it was just a 1 week class.
Okay.
Is anybody else able to unmute and tell me their experience?
Oh, well, I've been around for a long time. I'm a dabbler, and so I prefer wheel, or I've done mostly wheel, but I've also done some hand building and I'm learning to enjoy it, even though it's a lot slower. So I just like to try different things.
Yeah.
So this was attractive because it was something I never heard of or had ever tried.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a fun technique for when you don't have a lot of materials available.
Yeah.
You know.
And I have no studio in my home, so this is all new, getting the stuff together, and it'll be interesting. So the simpler, the better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
So yeah, I knew Matt, I think, I don't know if even had kids, I'm not sure. It was like 2000 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Took a class, and then I realized I had a 2-year-old, so I couldn't really do it. So I had all this stuff sitting for 15 years that needed to be glazed. Finally came back, I guess like 3 years ago, maybe. Took a few wheel. I'm mostly wheel. I took one hand building and I was miserable.
Oh no.
I know. I don't know. I just wanted to be at the wheel. I kept looking in the other studio, but this is good. Actually being in this environment. Well, I came back and then they closed. Unfortunately, I was like, just when I was ready to come back and do everything. Anyway, I was so happy when they reopened. And then now this. But in any event, this is kind of good because I do love wheel, but being able to be at home and not have everybody around me, you almost feel like this pressure. I don't know if other people feel that way. When you're in class, you're like looking at everybody and you want to like keep up and you want to do this and you want to. So like here, it's like, no, I'm just doing my own thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's hard because you don't have, I think a lot of people, you know, when you take the class, you have that focused time of you set aside, like, this is my time that I'm going to be doing my clay work, and you don't have the distraction.
Not having like you right there going, no, do that, you know, like.
Yeah.
So, but I'm grateful. And like the other lady, I'm in my basement. I have a folding table. I have my son's old laptop, and I'm just like so happy. I'm like, I have a mini studio now. So thank you for doing this.
Oh yeah. I was so happy that we were able to get this going again, because you know, I'm home with my daughter who is gonna be 8 in like a week, and my husband, and those are the only people that I talk to. So, and that's like my normal almost, because I work from home anyway. So I don't know, my normal social interaction is my studio class on Sundays when I go to the Clayworks and I teach the intermediate wheel. And it's so fun to be able to see everybody and talk and make clay things together that, you know, I was really missing it. So I'm glad that we were able to get this started and going. And if it makes you all feel any better, I'm in my basement too.
Okay, so my name's Jan.
And I got to own the dining room table.
Yes, I see the dining room table there.
So I've been working in clay for about 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of a gypsy. I mainly work out of Montgomery College. I live in Silver Spring.
Okay.
But I have taken Baltimore Clayworks class. I took a wood firing class with Jim Dugan, and I took a class with Matt Heilich, actually, at Matt, I'm blanking on the name of the school all of a sudden.
Touchstone.
Anyway, I do both hand building and wheel. And the last 3 years I've been working pretty intensively in clay and been to several workshops, and invited 2 of my friends from a workshop at Haystack who are here, Melissa and Ann. We go back 3 years. We took a workshop, bandana workshop.
Oh, nice.
And became fast friends and have remained friends since. So they are quite wonderful potters themselves, but they can tell you about that themselves. Touchstone, that's where I took Matt's class.
I am Melissa. My name is right on there. I took my very first class after a long break of doing something with clay that was very different from this. And I guess 2014, and I became obsessed with clay. And I eventually retired from my teaching job. I had a full-time teaching job. I was a second grade teacher and a social studies teacher. I have my own studio in my house, but I fire my own work and I play around with making my own glazes. I love wheel throwing, and wheel throwing was my first love. And I'm sorry I'm not looking at you, but I can't figure out where my camera is. Okay. I took a class with Mitch Iberg on using wild clay, and I find, and I had taken a class, the class Ann was talking about, or Jan was talking about in Haystack, was with bandana pottery, and all of those makers that use wild clay, to use the minimally processed on the wheel is really hard on your hands. So I've been, that's my entree into Kurinuki, is because I think if I want to use a minimally processed wild clay, it's going to be a lot better to do this technique rather than, you know, doing it on the wheel. So I'm obsessed. So let the obsession continue.
And I'm Ann. I'm the third member of the Haystack bandana crew, and Jan invited us to this workshop. Thank you very much for doing it. And I started in high school, dabbled in college, and then I had a career in kids and family, took about 20 some years off, and finally retired early 3 years ago because I really wanted to get back to pottery, and I have my own studio. This is not my studio, but I'm away from my home right now, but I do have my own studio in upstate New York. And I do mostly wheel throwing, but I'm intending to do more wheel throwing and then altering. And okay. I really love the altering. And so I'm also gravitating towards more hand building.
I'd say that's what hooked me into hand building, because I wanted to alter, and then I ended up just full on going into hand building.
Yeah. So right now I'm actually at my husband's family home in Maine, and I've set up a studio with plastic all over the office books, and this is perfect for that, for a small makeshift studio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that I didn't hear from? I can't keep track. All the squares.
This is Natalie. I know I spoke earlier, but yeah, I took a wheel class. It was my introduction to clay, January to March 2019, and I remember a few things and not too much else. So like I'm pretty newbie. Like when you say reclaiming it when it's soft, leather, hard, like I'd love instructions around that, and just yeah, I wanted to try hand building, and I saw this class come up and the timing was good. So
good. And I can answer that question real quick about reclaiming. So whenever you have clay that's been like carved away, or anything that you're not using, if you have soft clay, if it just came out of the bag, you can just squish it up and wedge it, and it's usually good to go. If it's dried out too much and it's not workable anymore, then it's reclaim, it's basically like recycling the clay. So you're taking the clay that's not usable anymore, whether it be dried out, just too much to work with, or if it's completely dried out, and then just like rehydrating it to become workable clay again. So the process, especially if you're at home and don't have the amount of wedging boards and plaster or anything, can be a bit of a challenge. So, if you can try and keep it as workable as possible, that'll be the easiest. What I tend to do is whenever I have scraps, so like next week when we're carving out and the scraps are too dry to just throw back into your bag, what I tend to do is just kind of give them a quick dunk in the clay or in water, and then just throw them back into an empty plastic bag and seal it up. And it's usually fairly workable by the next time. You can also just like throw it in a bag and squirt it with like a spray bottle of water, something like that. So you're just trying to introduce a little bit more water to it. If your clay is completely dried out, that's a little bit of a different story. So once it's been completely dry, then you have to like re-soak it and let it completely like kind of come back to a slip and then dry that out again. So since we're in our homes mostly, I'm trying to keep it as minimal as possible for having to reclaim, because I don't think anybody likes to reclaim. It's not. Yeah, it's no fun. It's a lot of wedging involved. And I know nobody likes to wedge. So, so how's it coming with the cups? Does everybody have a few that they feel like is working?
Number 4, but are we putting handles? Are these just like tumblers?
So if you would like to put a handle on it, you certainly can. You can choose to put a handle, and we can go over this next time if you would like. So if you want to add a handle that's been carved, so this one I carved the handle, which just, you know, because it's a carved cup, it made sense. I was just playing around to try it out. But I carved the handle as well. So what you can do if you have a piece that you want to put a handle on is take some of the clay, and it can just be the clay that you've scooped out from the inside, and you want to give it a little bit of a wedge so that it doesn't have any air pockets in it, and then just kind of form it into a block and let it dry out along with your piece. And we can play with carving some handles that go with the pots. So if you just kind of have like a little chunk of clay like this, just set it up next to your cup. And as in all handle making, have a couple. It's always good to have some to choose from. And I think that carving the handles is a little bit trickier. So you're going to want to have some to practice with, because it's pretty easy to just go right through it. So if you don't want to carve a handle, you can always add a coil or, you know, a pulled handle or whatever it is that however you prefer to make handles. But thanks for the reminder, because we will go over handles. Put that out there. So I think 4 is, you know, I mean, you can go for more. I'll show you some of the ones just as some other options. If you want to play around, you know, if you're playing through the week, you can think of some different shapes. So this is just like a little box shape that I was trying to play with. This is one I was experimenting with stamping into, which we'll talk about, I think on week 3, we're going to play around with adding some different surface textures and stuff. But, you know, if you wanted to experiment a little bit and go for some different shapes, you certainly can. This is one that I played with, that I used that wire tool, that wiggle wire tool, like the spring, to carve or to just cut through the clay so it left these marks. So this one is real angular because I just sliced right up the side there. But you can kind of, if you have a tool, like a wire tool, you can play around with adding some different marks like that.
Is that a cup? Can we see the inside?
So I haven't carved this one.
Okay.
Yeah, this one's still in its rough stages.
I like that.
Did that start as a cylinder and then you gave it like 4 walls with the wiggle wire? How does that work?
Yeah, and I can show you. I'll show you how that one went. So my wire tool is just this one, and you can see it's just got a texture to it. And you could, I think Matt said before, if you have just like an old pen laying around, you can dismantle it and use the little spring in there. And you just kind of stretch the spring out a little bit. So I'm just going to do this with a little bit of clay I have right here. So I just start out the same way, where it's just, you know, I just kind of pounded the clay into its basic shape. And then to get the wire, what I ended up doing was I put the block a little bit over my board. So there's like that slight overhang. And that's just going to allow me to get the wire right there so I can, so just going to hold the wire tight, just like you would if you were taking a piece off the wheel, where you're just kind of tightening that wire. And you might need to hold the clay steady. And then as I pull it up and away, it leaves that pattern. So I just did that on all sides.
So say theoretically you made one that had walls way too thin. Should I scrap it or just carve it out less next week?
Let's leave it and we'll carve it out a little bit less. How thin are we talking? Like
it's not too bad. It's just another one.
You froze a little bit. Can you hold it up again? I think you froze. Oh. I think that's fine. I would save it.
Just like over here, it kind of
I would save it and
okay, so I
don't carve it quite as much next time and see where it goes. Because it doesn't look like it's too thin. So as you're starting to finish up with these, just take kind of a quick inventory of your pieces and see if you have any like really tiny bits that are sticking out. You might want to just kind of try and smooth those down just a little bit so that you don't have like crusties the next time. But so just like if you have like a little something, just, you don't want any like super sharp edges. And remember that when you're drying these out, it's useful to put them upside down on your board so that the inside can dry a little bit slower than the outside. And honestly, I do that with all of my hand-built pieces anyway. So I think that's not just for this, but if you're ever doing any sort of hand building and you have seams on the inside that if you've added a coil or something in there to let it dry slowly, I always dry mine upside down on some foam, and that helps tremendously with any of that cracking issues that you can have on the inside. Does anybody have any questions about what we've been doing today or in general?
Can I just see your handles that you started again?
The chunk of clay?
Yeah,
it's
not
literally
curved or anything. It's just it's a little mini
Yeah.
slab kind of. Okay.
Yep. It's just like a chunk of clay.
Just a chunk of clay.
Just a chunk of clay. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks.
The technical term.
Do you use these mostly like for coffee, tea? Like, is that these mugs? I know we can do other shapes, but I'm saying the ones that you're showing and that you've made, is that?
So for something like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this to me would be, I would probably call this like a whiskey cup, honestly, because it's a little bit too, I need more coffee than this.
I know, that's what I was going to say. These, I'm like, okay, that was my problem with the wheel. I was working on getting things bigger. Everything just kept, you know, so I have all these little things that, so maybe I'll just take a bigger piece of clay and make it bigger.
Exactly. So just start with a larger chunk of clay. It's
Right.
kind of nice because I think with the wheel, it does take a little bit more time to be able to get your walls up and to make something larger. But for this process, just start with a larger chunk of clay and carve that. So like this, it's still probably too small, honestly, for me. I need a lot of coffee.
Me too. Me too.
But yeah, you can make them whatever size you'd like.
I don't know if you can see the like kind of indenting here. I don't know if it's because I didn't like wedge it well enough. Do you have any recommendations around that? Should I just like scrap this, or is there something else I should do?
So is that just a little spot on the outside? So you can either just leave it because we're going to be carving away. And I think part of the beauty of these is the little imperfections. If it bothers you, you can take just your finger and just smooth it into itself. Or you can take, if you have a rib of some sort, like a, you know, anything like that, and just smooth it over. As long as you're not trapping air in there. So if it is a hole, like if you have a hole behind there, then that can cause an issue. But if it's just like a little indentation, probably from if you were wedging or you smushed it, it just kind of is a fold in the clay. And you can just take your finger and smooth that out. So for next week, we're going to continue with these pieces that you're making tonight. If you want to keep making these as the week goes on, then by all means, make as many as you'd like. And just remember that you want to keep them at, excuse me, at a soft leather hard so that we can carve them next time. So once they have reached the right consistency, cover them up real well and try and keep them that way. The other thing you can do if you're worried about, if you don't think you're going to be able to come back to them, is just cover them up now and check them the night before. If they're too wet, then take the wrapping off and you can let them dry a little bit more. It's always easier to dry things out than to try to put moisture back in. So you're better off babying them a bit and trying to keep them damp, and then, you know, the morning of, you can let them dry out a little bit if you need to. So
How do we distinguish soft leather hard versus some other stage? Like, is there something about, I know you showed that it kind of like keeps its shape. Is there anything else about like?
So a soft leather hard should feel, if you try to push on it, it shouldn't collapse. But if you push your fingernail into it, you should easily be able to make a mark. Okay, so I can still feel that there's moisture. There's no part of this that looks like it's like the color has changed dramatically from the rest of it. it's still like pretty workable. So it's firm. It's not gonna collapse. It's not like this is wet and squishy. This is definitely like firmer, but I can push a nail into it. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
I know it's hard if we were in a regular class, I would just hand it to you and you would be able to feel it. But online, you have to rely on my description.
If it's helpful, we describe it as cheese hard as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Which is why we use cheese slicers and other tools in the kitchen.
Thank you.
You guys can all, as you're doing all of your quarantine cooking this week, you can take stock of all of your kitchen tools and think about which ones you can bring down to the studio.
I think when I went to actually buy one of those from a clay store, I think it's called a harp. Does that sound right? H-A-R-P? I think that's what they called it. Because I couldn't, you couldn't search thing that looks like cheese cutter. I think they called it a harp.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I have purchased multiple wiggle wires that are cheese slicers. Both from a dollar store and from Amazon.
Yeah, I've seen, I mean, you can get a ton of different graters, and I was starting to look up like vegetable peelers, because you can use those too. And you can find all different kinds of weird stuff.
Any last words before we sign off for the night?
This has been great. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. One thing I was going to say, I was going to try and set up some sort of like some sort of a way online that we could all post pictures of like the in progress work, and just as a way to have a little bit more community, because I know that's something I really miss about being able to go to actual classes, is that you don't have that, like, that sense of community. So I'm going to look into what the best way is.
Could we just send you photos and then you could, in your PowerPoint next week, share them?
I could, but I think if you guys could be able to like talk with each other,
yeah,
you might get more immediate feedback that way. So I'm going to look into it, but so you might, look out for an email and see if you, if I can send a link or something to just a way that we can all share. Even if you can't take a picture and upload it, you might be able to just see what other people are doing. And if it's a way that I can share, steps along the way, it might be useful.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks, Shawna.
You're welcome. Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks. See you next week.
See you next week.